Daniel Sports Central, we go over a college football game preview and prediction on the 2022 Texas Bowl matchup between the Texas Tech Red Raiders and the Ole Miss Rebels. Both teams have had good seasons getting to this point. Texas Tech, one of the top teams in the Big 12 this season. They finished out the regular season at 7-5 and also on a 3-game winning streak. They're taking on Ole Miss, the team that started out the season 7-0, but this team has fallen off a bit down the stretch. They've lost 4 of their last 5, but there's no doubt that Ole Miss is still a team with a high ceiling. We'll be over a full game preview and prediction on this matchup here today, starting with their team trends. Texas Tech beat Oklahoma 51-48 to finish out the regular season. That game went into overtime. It was a high-scoring shootout. 51-48, Texas Tech gets the win, a huge win for the Red Raiders there, and they finished off the regular season at 7-5. This was definitely a good season for Texas Tech, and considering this was a season that really didn't have very high expectations going in. I mean, for Texas Tech to beat both Texas, the Longhorns, and Oklahoma in the same season was pretty impressive, and also both games went into overtime. But for Ole Miss, they lost to Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl. 22-24 was the final score, so a disappointing loss for them to finish out the regular season. But 8-4 as the record. Not a bad season for Ole Miss, but I mean, this team starting out the season 7-0. It is brutal to lose 4 of your last 5. Their one win in that final stretch was against Texas A&M on the road, 31-28. But they did take a couple of close losses. They lost Alabama by 6, kept it really close against the Crimson Tide, and then that 2-point loss against Mississippi State. But they also took a couple of ugly losses, losing to LSU by 25 and then losing to Arkansas by 15, which Arkansas, you would think, maybe not a bad loss, but Arkansas has turned out to be a pretty mediocre team this season. So maybe that was a bit of a disappointing loss in the end. Games be on Wednesday, December 20th in Houston, Texas. Your kickoff is 9 p.m. Eastern. Spread's going with Ole Miss by 3.5. Over-under is 70. So we could be seeing a higher scoring matchup here. And honestly, that wouldn't surprise me one bit, considering both defenses haven't been great at points this season, but both offenses have proven to be good. And the FBI is going with Ole Miss as well, 62.1%. Series history, Ole Miss leads at 4-2. They've won the last 2 matchups, and the last game was in 2018, so we did see the two teams play each other in the regular season back in 2018. Ole Miss won that game. Stat comparison, Texas Tech 34th in points per game. They're 102nd in points allowed, so you can see that this is a Texas Tech defense that allows a lot of points. They allow an average of 30 points a game, which definitely could be improved, but offensively, they are getting 34. Pass yards a game, they're 13th. Rush yards a game, they're 62nd. And then for yards allowed, they are 97th in passing, 94th in rushing. This is a Texas Tech team that has started 3 different quarterbacks this season. You had Donovan Smith in the earlier parts of the season, and he has already transferred out. He is out of Texas Tech already. And then he ended up getting replaced by Baron Morin halfway through the season, which he ended up getting injured, which led to the Oregon transfer quarterback Tyler Shuck. And Tyler Shuck is 3-0 as the starter for Texas Tech. So that's something to keep in mind. He's played fairly well as the starter. I mean, if you look at Morin, he was 1-3 in games that he started, and Donovan Smith was 3-2. So Tyler Shuck has played the best out of any of the starting quarterbacks it seems so far this season. He had 436 pass yards against Oklahoma. That is something to keep in mind. And either way, even though this Texas Tech team has started 3 different quarterbacks, they do remain as the 13th best team in the country when it comes to passing. But defensively, yeah, they're poor in both the passing defense and the rushing defense, something to keep in mind. As for Ole Miss, they're 30th in points per game, 57th in points allowed, 67th in pass yards a game, 2nd in rush yards. This is the 2nd best rushing team in the country here. Then for yards allowed, they're 63rd in passing, 84th in rushing. So overall, statistically, Ole Miss is the better team. Even though, I mean, the main reason why this game could be expected to be close is because if you look at both teams down the stretch, Texas Tech has been the better team down the stretch versus Ole Miss. And that's why the spread is so close with this game, is because of how both teams have been trending. But Ole Miss statistically is the better team. There's no doubt with that. Defensively, they're simply better. I mean, on the offense, both teams are averaging right around 34 points a game. But when it comes to the defense, Ole Miss is definitely the better team. And they also have an outstanding backfield. Once again, 2nd in the country. They're averaging 261 rush yards a game. Recent matchups, Texas Tech, they beat Oklahoma 51-48 in overtime. They beat Iowa State 14-10. They also beat Kansas 43-28. So there's your 3 wins down the stretch in a row for Texas Tech. They did lose to TCU 24-34. Fast forward, TCU is in the college football playoff, and they also got blown out to Baylor. So you can see some of that inconsistency back in October, losing to Baylor, who wasn't great this season. Finished out the season at 6-6, but also, I mean, I'll say this: Texas Tech has played a pretty difficult schedule, one of the toughest schedules in the Big 12. They had to play NC State on the road back in September. Houston was ranked 25th when they played them. They beat them in a double overtime. So Texas Tech has had 3 overtime games to this point this season. And I mean, you consider too, Texas Tech, they had to play Kansas State. They played Oklahoma State when they were ranked 7th in the country. They played TCU. So I mean, it's been a difficult schedule for Texas Tech, and all things considered, I'd say this team has done pretty well. But as for Ole Miss, they lost to Mississippi State 22-24. Lost to Arkansas 27-42. Lost to Alabama 24-30. They beat Texas A&M 31-28, but that's the one win that they have in their last 5 games. They lost to LSU 20-45. So it's been rough down the stretch for Ole Miss. And this is a team that, I mean, if you look at their best win this season, probably against Kentucky back in early October when Kentucky was ranked 7th in the country. But even Kentucky didn't really finish out as a very strong team. So, I mean, for Ole Miss, you could consider this schedule to be, and they might have one of the weakest schedules in the SEC for sure. I mean, they played Alabama, and they're obviously in the SEC West, and they play Kentucky as one of those crossover games into the East. But once again, Kentucky didn't finish out as a very good team. So there's a lot of things considered here on both sides, but also, I mean, they did play Troy back in week 1, which fast forward, Troy turned out to be a really good team. So yeah, there's a lot of things considered here on both schedules. Texas Tech, definitely one of the stronger schedules in their conference. Ole Miss, maybe one of the weakest. Key points: Texas Tech 7-5. They played their best football in November. Tyler Shuck is 3-0 as starting quarterback. I mean, obviously the quarterback situation's been a mess for Texas Tech, but I mean, you look but this team has had success with it. I mean, I know that it's been different quarterback every few weeks, but Tyler Shuck has led Texas Tech to their best football this season. But for Ole Miss, after starting 7-0, finished out the season 1-4. It's been bumpy down the stretch. Quinshawn Judkins, he's a key impact player for Ole Miss, and he's honestly one of the main guys that I'm concerned about when talking about Texas Tech. Quinshawn Judkins is a really talented player. He's probably the best player on this offense. I mean, you consider he's rushed for nearly 1,500 yards this season and 16 touchdowns. The big concern for Texas Tech is going to be stopping him. And I'm just not sure if Texas Tech will be able to. But Ole Miss is a strong team despite their late season slump. I mean, this is still a team with a high ceiling for sure, and there's a reason why this team had such high expectations heading into the season. I mean, yeah, this is a talented team that just has had just a slump down the stretch. But that said, let's get to the prediction here for Texas Tech and Ole Miss coming up here in the Texas Bowl. And this is a prediction where I had one team at first, but then I switched it right before I recorded this because I decided, you know what, I just see it going the other way. And I am going with Texas Tech to win this game 38-34. Once again, I originally had Ole Miss in this game, but the more I looked at both teams and the more I realized, I mean, Ole Miss has just not been very good down the stretch. And you consider too, I mean, this team doesn't really have many quality wins. I mean, they beat Kentucky 22-19 back in October, but once again, Kentucky didn't turn out to be the team that we thought they were. I mean, at the time, Kentucky was ranked number 7, but that's a team that didn't really finish out the season as one of the top teams in the conference. So, I mean, you consider that. You look at some of their other games, like 34 points to Auburn, 28 to Vanderbilt, 27 to Tulsa. That Tulsa game was really close. I just don't know that Ole Miss is they're 8-4. They've had a good season, but I just don't think this is a great team. And I think Texas Tech, on the flip side, this team is playing their best football this season right now. I think Texas Tech, and this is a gritty football team in Texas Tech too. Seeing how they played against Oklahoma, and they played really well in high-pressure situations. I mean, their overtime games this season, perfect example. I mean, they played Texas in overtime. They got the win there. They beat Houston in double overtime. So they're 3 overtime games, high-pressure situations. This team has played really well. So I'm going to go with Texas Tech here, 38-34. I'll say 55%. Honestly, this is one of the tougher games to predict this bowl season, maybe even the toughest. Over under 70. I'm taking the over. If you think Texas Tech is going to win, take the over for sure. If you think Ole Miss, you're probably more safe taking the under. But I think Texas Tech, if they win it, it's probably going to be a shootout. So I'm going to say Texas Tech to cover the spread and over as well. But that said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this game. And I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.